This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
All right, let's get right into it. We're going to tackle a massive idea today. I mean, this is a concept that has launched revolutions, toppled empires, and completely shaped the world we live in. But what if I told you that most of the time, we don't really know what we mean when we say the word? Yeah. In this explainer, we're going to take that word, equality, and we're going to tear it apart. Equality. You know, it's one of those words we treat like a moral reflex. You say it, and pretty much everyone just nods along. Equality? Yep. Good thing. Absolutely. It's a fundamental value, right? But have we ever actually stopped to ask ourselves, what kind of equality are we really talking about? Because, the second you start pulling on that little thread, you find out it's not one single idea at all. It's a lot more complicated. I mean, think about it. Are we talking about equality of income, where every single person earns the exact same amount? Or is it equality of rights, where we're all just treated the same under the law? And what about equality of ability? I mean, that's just impossible, isn't it? Or is it something way deeper, something like equality of human dignity? You see, the moment you break it down, it gets complex fast. So to figure out how we got here, we've got to go back, way back. So, Section 1, from the soul to the law. See, this whole idea, it didn't start in a parliament or on a protest line. It started somewhere much more personal, much quieter, inside the human mind. And you can literally trace the journey of this idea through history. It kicks off with the ancient Stoics in Greece and Rome. For them, equality was all about our shared ability to reason. Then early Christianity comes along and reframes it as equality before God, a spiritual thing, a promise for the next life. It isn't until the Enlightenment that we drag that idea down to earth and make it equality before the law. And finally, the modern state takes that principle and bakes it into the very infrastructure of how we live. And this right here, this shows the huge shift in thinking. For the Stoics and the early Christians, equality was totally an internal thing. It was in your soul. So you could be a slave in chains, but in your spirit or in the eyes of God, you were equal to the emperor. That idea could exist right alongside massive, brutal social inequality. But the modern world, it flipped that script completely. Equality became an external system, the actual foundation for our laws and politics. And then came the biggest pivot of all. I love how the source material puts this. Marx shifted equality from the soul to the stomach. And just like that, boom. It wasn't about your capacity for reason or your soul or your rights. It was about whether you had food on the table. It was about stuff, material distribution. And that changed absolutely everything. Which brings us right to Section 2, the 20th century experiment. Because at this point, the question of economic equality wasn't just in books anymore. Nope. It was fought over in a massive global conflict that defined a century. So on one side, you've got communism, and it had this incredibly powerful story, this promise to create total economic equality by getting rid of all disparity. It's a really compelling idea, but as a system, it didn't work. Now, on the other side, you have capitalism. But here's the twist everyone forgets. Capitalism didn't just win. It survived because it started absorbing the ideas of its rival. Think about it. Labor laws, social security, redistributing wealth. These were basically socialist ideas that got woven into capitalist systems to stop communism from looking so good. So the big takeaway is this. The ideologies clashed, sure, but the systems kind of fused. Capitalism stopped being this rigid ideology and became more like a flexible economic engine, an infrastructure that pretty much every country uses today, whether they're a democracy or a former communist state. The great battle of ideas ended in this weird, unexpected merger. Okay, so where in the world does that leave us today? Well, that brings us to Section 3 and a completely different way of looking at this whole problem. Let's call it a new danger gauge. See, today, when economists and policymakers talk about inequality, they use a specific tool to actually measure it. It's called the Gini coefficient. All it is really is a number that tells you how wealth is spread out in a country. It's a way to measure the gap between the richest and the poorest. And here's the thing. That number is telling us, in a lot of places around the world, that gap is getting bigger. Economic inequality is on the rise. And this leads to a really provocative question. So, is perfect equality the goal here? Should we be aiming for a Gini coefficient of 0 where everyone has exactly the same? Your gut might scream yes, but the modern answer is, probably not. What if the goal isn't some utopian vision of perfect equality? What if the real goal is just stability. Now, that is a huge reframing of this entire debate. Think of it like this. Instead of seeing inequality as a moral sin, we can see it as a parameter that just needs to be managed. Like the pressure gauge on a steam engine. If the pressure, the inequality, gets too high, the whole thing can explode into social instability, protests, even revolution. So the goal isn't to get the pressure to zero, because that might kill all economic motivation. The goal is to keep it in a safe, stable, functioning range. Inequality becomes a warning light on the dashboard of society. And that brings us to our final section, where we take this super practical idea and bring it back around to something a little more philosophical. Section 4, a story we cannot lose. So if the old fights between capitalism and communism are over, what's the new test for whether a government is doing its job? Well, it all comes down to market control. Can your system stop the gap between rich and poor from becoming a giant chasm? Can it handle it when people face personal economic disaster? Can it manage huge systemic crises like a pandemic or a financial meltdown? Is the basic system of taxes and budgets actually working? The thing is, it doesn't matter if you're a democracy or an authoritarian state. If you start failing these tests, you lose your legitimacy. Which brings us right back to our big question. Is equality a dream? This perfect utopian vision we chase? Or is it a design? A practical, engineered tool for keeping our society from flying apart at the seams? It really seems like we've landed on design, right? But there's just one more piece to this puzzle. Because maybe, just maybe, beyond being a parameter for economists to measure, equality is something more. Maybe it really is one of those essential stories that we as humans cannot live without. It's the story that gives our societies purpose, the story that pushes us to try and build a better world, even if we know that perfection is always out of reach. It's not just a number on a chart. It's a core, fundamental part of the human narrative. And that is something worth thinking about.
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.